Before Sean Combs became Diddy, before the private jets, before the empire worth nearly $1 billion, before he changed the face of hip-hop forever, he was a hungry kid from Harlem with nothing but rage and ambition. A kid who watched his father get murdered when he was just 3 years old. A kid who grew up in the projects, surrounded by poverty and violence, yet somehow convinced he was destined for greatness. And then someone handed him a book. A book with a black cover and gold lettering. A book so controversial that prisons banned it across America, yet Fortune 500 CEOs kept it hidden in their desk drawers. A book that would become his Bible, his blueprint, his weapon. The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. What Sean Combs did with those laws changed everything. It built one of the most remarkable empires in entertainment history. It made him a billionaire. It put him on magazine covers and guest lists in private islands. But here's what nobody talks about. The same book that built his empire may have also planted the seeds of its destruction. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you cannot understand what Diddy became without understanding where he came from. January 1970, Harlem, New York. Sean John Combs is born into a world that has already decided his fate. His neighborhood is ravaged by drugs, crime, and poverty. The crack epidemic is about to devastate black communities across America. The odds of a kid from these streets becoming a billionaire are essentially zero. But Janice Combs, Sean's mother, refused to accept those odds. She worked multiple jobs. She moved the family to Mount Vernon, a safer suburb. She instilled in her son an unshakable belief that he was special, that he was destined for more, that the circumstances of his birth did not determine the destination of his life. There's a story that defines young Sean Combs. When he was 12 years old, he started a paper route. Most kids would deliver papers and collect their money. Sean did something different. He hired other kids to deliver the papers for him. He paid them a portion of the earnings and kept the rest. At 12 years old, he had already figured out that the real money wasn't in labor. It was in leverage. That instinct would define everything that came next. But let me pause here, because there's something you need to understand about the 48 Laws of Power before we go further. Robert Greene spent years researching this book. He studied the most cunning, ruthless, and successful figures in human history. Machiavelli, Sun Tzu, Louis XIV, Bismarck, con artists and cult leaders, politicians and generals. He distilled their strategies, their manipulations, their secrets into 48 laws. These aren't moral guidelines. They're not about being a good person. They're about winning, about dominating, about accumulating and wielding power in its purest, most amoral form. Law 1. Never outshine the master. Law 3. Conceal your intentions. Law 7. Get others to do the work for you, but always take the credit. Law 15. Crush your enemy totally. Law 17. Keep others in suspended terror. Cultivate an air of unpredictability. This book isn't self-help. It's a war manual, a guide to human chess. A handbook for those who see life as a zero-sum game where every interaction has a winner and a loser. And young Sean Combs absorbed it like scripture. Now let's fast forward to 1990, Howard University. Sean Combs is a business major, but he's not interested in classes. He's interested in parties. He throws events that become legendary on campus. Events where the who's who of the DC area show up. Events that lose money but build reputation. See, most people throw parties to make profit. Sean threw parties to make connections, to be seen, to build a brand. He was already applying Law 6, court attention at all costs, even when it cost him literally. But his big break came when he talked his way into an internship at Uptown Records. Now, getting the internship was impressive. What he did with it was extraordinary. Most interns make coffee and answer phones. Sean Combs made himself indispensable. He arrived before everyone. He left after everyone. He studied every aspect of the business. He paid attention to what artists wanted, what executives needed, what the market was missing. Within 2 years, this intern was running A&R for the entire label. He discovered Mary J. Blige. He signed Jodeci. He was creating hits while executives twice his age took notes. And here's where we see Law 35 in action. Master the art of timing. Sean knew that Uptown Records was his training ground, not his destination. He was learning everything he could, building relationships, understanding the industry. He was patient, strategic, calculating. But patience has its limits. And in 1993, Andre Harrell, the CEO of Uptown Records, made a decision that would change music history forever. He fired Sean Combs. The details of why remain disputed. Some say Sean was too ambitious, too aggressive, too hungry. Some say he was stepping on too many toes. Some say Andre saw him as a threat. Whatever the reason, the message was clear: you're done here. Most people would have been devastated. Sean Combs was furious, but more than that, he was calculating, because he had read the 48 Laws of Power. And he knew. Law 25, recreate yourself. He didn't beg for his job back. He didn't fade into obscurity. Instead, he took everything he had learned at Uptown and decided to build something of his own. Something bigger. Something that nobody could take away from him. Within months, he had secured a deal with Arista Records. Clive Davis, the legendary music executive, saw something in this fired 23-year-old that others had missed. He gave him his own label. Bad Boy Records was born. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Because starting a label is one thing, building an empire is another. Sean Combs, now calling himself Puff Daddy, needed a star. He needed an artist who could put Bad Boy on the map. He found that artist in the most unlikely place. A demo tape from an overweight kid from Brooklyn who called himself Biggie Smalls. Christopher Wallace was everything the music industry said wouldn't work. He was huge. He wasn't conventionally handsome. He rapped about selling crack and street life with a poetic complexity that made other rappers sound like amateurs. And Puffy saw gold. This is Law 11. Learn to keep people dependent on you. Puffy didn't just sign Biggie. He shaped him. He polished him. He created the image, the marketing, the entire universe around this incredible talent. He made Biggie need Bad Boy as much as Bad Boy needed Biggie. The contract, by the way, was heavily in Bad Boy's favor, but we'll get to that. When Ready to Die dropped in 1994, it was like a bomb going off in hip-hop. The album was raw, honest, and undeniably brilliant. But notice something. Puffy was in almost every video. Puffy was at every photo shoot. Puffy was mentioned in every interview. The producer, the executive, the guy behind the scenes, was making himself the star. Law 6 again. Court attention at all costs. While other producers stayed in the shadows, Puffy put himself in the spotlight. Critics mocked him. They called him a hype man, an attention seeker, a flash over substance. They didn't understand. Every time someone talked about Puffy, they talked about Bad Boy. Every controversy, every headline, every outfit, every take that ad-lib. It all translated to visibility, to cultural relevance, to power. The shiny suits became iconic. The champagne lifestyle became a brand. The parties became legendary, and Bad Boy became the hottest label in hip-hop. By 1996, Puffy had assembled a roster that dominated the charts. Biggie, Faith Evans, Total, 112, Mace, The Lox, Craig Mack, hit after hit after hit. But power attracts enemies, and the East Coast-West Coast rivalry was about to explode. I need to pause here because this next chapter involves real tragedy, real death. And it shows both the limits and the consequences of treating life like a game of power. The beef between Bad Boy and Death Row Records, between Puffy and Suge Knight, between Biggie and Tupac, has been analyzed endlessly. Diss tracks were exchanged. Accusations flew. The media fanned the flames because conflict sells magazines. And then in September 1996, Tupac Shakur was murdered in Las Vegas. 6 months later, in March 1997, Christopher Wallace, the notorious B.I.G., was murdered in Los Angeles. Puffy had lost his best friend, his biggest star, the foundation of his empire. This is where we see something fascinating about how Puffy had internalized the 48 laws of power. Specifically, Law 28. enter action with boldness. The world expected him to retreat, to mourn in private, to let Bad Boy fade. The label's future was in serious doubt. Biggie was irreplaceable. Instead, Puffy made one of the boldest moves in music history. He released I'll Be Missing You. Think about what that song represented. He took the Police's Every Breath You Take, one of the most recognizable songs in rock history. He didn't initially clear the sample properly. He put Faith Evans on the track, Biggie's widow. He made himself the lead voice on a tribute to his own artist. The audacity was staggering. Critics were outraged. Some called it exploitative. Some called it tasteless. Some called it genius. The song spent 11 weeks at #1. It became one of the best-selling singles of all time. It introduced hip-hop to suburban audiences who had never listened before. It cemented Puffy's legend. Yes, Sting eventually got all the publishing royalties. Yes, there were lawsuits. But Puffy understood something that his critics didn't. In the attention economy, being talked about is more valuable than being praised. Controversy is currency, and boldness creates its own reality. Robert Greene wrote that timidity is dangerous, that boldness has magic in it. Puffy proved it. But here's where the laws of power start showing their darker side. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, Puffy, now calling himself P. Diddy, built an empire that extended far beyond music. Sean John clothing became a fashion phenomenon. He expanded into restaurants, television, vodka, media. Forbes would eventually estimate his net worth at close to $1 billion. But the artists who built Bad Boy weren't sharing in that wealth. And they started talking. Remember Law 11. Learn to keep people dependent on you? The contracts at Bad Boy became notorious in the industry. Artists would later claim they were trapped, that they saw pennies while Diddy saw millions, that the system was designed to keep them needing him. Mace, one of the biggest stars of the late 90s, walked away from hip-hop entirely and became a pastor. Part of his decision, he would later explain, was about escaping an industry he felt had exploited him. The Lox, a group Diddy had signed, famously protested outside Bad Boy's offices. They held signs. They demanded to be released from their contracts. The image was striking. Artists literally begging to escape from one of the most successful labels in hip-hop. Faith Evans, who had been both an artist and family through her marriage to Biggie, had complicated relationships with the label that would take years to fully emerge. This is the contradiction at the heart of the 48 Laws of Power. The book teaches you to make people dependent on you, but dependent people are also resentful people. They remember, they wait, and eventually some of them speak. Law 15 says, crush your enemy totally. The logic is that wounded enemies are more dangerous than destroyed ones. They plot revenge. They wait for weakness. Diddy never crushed his enemies. He created them. Dozens of them. People with grievances and memories and lawyers. But through the 2000s and 2010s, none of it seemed to matter. Diddy appeared untouchable. Scandal after scandal would emerge, and somehow he would survive. The 1999 nightclub shooting, where he was charged with bribery and weapons violations, acquitted. The rumors that swirled for decades, never substantiated legally. The lawsuits that piled up, settled quietly. This is Law 26. Keep your hands clean. Never be seen as the cause of problems. Have others do the dirty work. Maintain deniability. For 30 years, it seemed to work perfectly. Diddy reinvented himself over and over. Puff Daddy became P. Diddy became Love became back to Diddy. Each transformation felt calculated, intentional, aligned with the cultural moment. Law 25, recreate yourself. Don't let them pin you down. Control your image. Write your own narrative. He dated Jennifer Lopez, creating one of the most photographed couples of the early 2000s. He threw white parties that became the hottest tickets in Hollywood. He ran the New York City Marathon. He won Academy Awards for documentaries he produced. He became a mentor figure on shows like Making the Band. The narrative shifted from ruthless music executive to elder statesman of hip-hop, from controversial to celebrated, from feared to respected. And through it all, the 48 laws of power seem to be working exactly as designed. But power has a half-life. And the laws that protect you can also expose you. Let me tell you about Law 5. So much depends on reputation. Guard it with your life. For decades, Diddy's reputation was complicated but ultimately positive. Yes, there were controversies. Yes, there were rumors. But the dominant narrative was success, empire, power. The American dream realized through hip-hop. That reputation was worth billions. It opened doors to investors, to brands, to opportunities. It was the foundation everything else was built on. And then, in November 2023, everything changed. Cassie Ventura, who had been Diddy's partner for over a decade, filed a lawsuit. The allegations were shocking. Abuse, control, violence, a pattern of behavior that spanned years. Within 24 hours, Diddy settled the lawsuit. The speed of that settlement told its own story. But here's what Diddy perhaps didn't understand, or maybe understood too late. Law 5 cuts both ways. Once reputation is damaged, it's almost impossible to rebuild. And a settled lawsuit isn't a closed chapter, it's an invitation. More accusers came forward, then more. Federal investigations began. Homes were raided. The dam that had held for 30 years was breaking. Law 47 warns, do not go past the mark you aimed for. In victory, learn when to stop. This may be the law Diddy forgot. Success can create a sense of invincibility. When you've escaped consequences for decades, you start to believe you always will. You stop being careful. You stop watching your back. You stop remembering that power is always temporary. The parties grew more extravagant, the lifestyle more excessive, the behavior, allegedly, more reckless. When you believe you're untouchable, you act like you're untouchable. And that's exactly when you become vulnerable. Robert Greene writes about this phenomenon. He calls it the intoxication of power. It's the moment when the powerful believe their own mythology, when they confuse fear with respect, when they mistake silence for consent. History is filled with figures who fell at the height of their power precisely because they couldn't imagine falling. Napoleon at his peak. Emperors who became gods in their own minds. Executives who thought they were above the law. Diddy may have made that same mistake. But there's another law that haunts this story. Law 19. Know who you're dealing with. Do not offend the wrong person. Over 30 years in the entertainment industry, how many people did Diddy offend? How many people felt used, discarded, exploited? How many former associates, former partners, former friends harbored resentment? The laws of power teach you to use people, to leverage them, to discard them when they're no longer useful. But people aren't chess pieces. They remember, they talk to each other, they compare notes, and eventually they coordinate. The cascade of accusations against Diddy didn't happen in a vacuum. People who had been silent for years suddenly found their voices. Corroborating details emerged. Patterns became visible. This is the vulnerability that the 48 Laws of Power never adequately addresses. The book treats human beings as objects to be manipulated. It doesn't account for the networks of memory, resentment, and solidarity that form among the used. Let me tell you something about power that Robert Greene understands, but perhaps Diddy forgot. Power is relational. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. It requires other people to participate in your story of dominance. They have to believe you're powerful for you to actually be powerful. When that belief cracks, everything cracks. Suddenly, the phone calls aren't returned. The invitations stop. The brand partnerships dissolve. The empire that looked like stone reveals itself to be made of sand. And here's the cruelest irony of all. The 48 Laws of Power is fundamentally about survival, about protection, about never being vulnerable. The entire philosophy is defensive, even when it's aggressive. Yet the man who made this book his Bible, who internalized its teachings more completely than perhaps anyone in entertainment history, may have made himself more vulnerable by following it, because the laws teach you to see everyone as a potential threat or a potential tool. They don't teach you to build genuine relationships. They don't teach you to create loyalty through love rather than fear. They don't teach you that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is be truly good to people. Diddy had associates, he had employees, he had artists under contract, he had women in his life, he had people who depended on him economically, but how many true friends did he have? How many people who would stand by him not because of what he could do for them, but because they genuinely loved him? When the empire started crumbling, where were the defenders? Where were the voices saying, I know this man, and this isn't who he is? The silence was deafening. Let me step back and offer some perspective here, because this isn't just a story about one man. It's a story about a philosophy, about what happens when you treat life as a game to be won rather than a life to be lived. The 48 Laws of Power has sold millions of copies. It's read in boardrooms and prison cells, by executives and athletes, by people who see the world as a competition and want to win. And let me be clear, the book contains genuine insights. Power does work the way Greene describes. People do respond to the strategies he outlines. If your goal is purely to accumulate power, the book is effective. But here's what the book doesn't tell you. Power for its own sake is empty. You can accumulate it endlessly and still feel hollow. You can dominate everyone around you and still be alone. The book doesn't tell you about the anxiety that comes from constantly strategizing, from never being able to trust anyone because you've been taught that everyone is manipulating everyone, from watching your back so obsessively that you never relax. The book doesn't tell you about what it does to your soul, about how treating people as objects gradually makes you unable to see them as human, about how manipulation becomes so habitual that you lose access to authenticity. And the book definitely doesn't tell you about the ending, because here's the thing about the historical figures Greene studies. The Medicis, the Borgias, the kings and conquerors and power players throughout history. Most of them fell, violently usually, betrayed by the same systems of fear and manipulation they created, surrounded by sycophants who disappeared the moment weakness appeared. Power strategies might help you climb, but they don't help you stay, and they definitely don't help you fall with grace. Sean Combs took a book and built an empire that's undeniable, from the projects of Harlem to the penthouses of Manhattan, from an intern making coffee to a mogul making billions, from nobody to somebody that everybody knew. He changed music. The sound of the late 90s and early 2000s was largely shaped by his ear, his vision, his willingness to blur the lines between hip-hop and pop. He changed fashion. Sean John made urban fashion mainstream in ways that opened doors for brands that followed. He changed what was possible for Black entrepreneurs in entertainment. Those achievements are real. That impact is undeniable. That story of success against all odds is genuinely inspiring in many ways. But the same philosophy that enabled those achievements may have also corroded them from within. The same laws that built the empire may have been hollowing out its foundations year after year, decision after decision, until one day it collapsed. And maybe that's the lesson. Maybe that's why this story matters beyond gossip and scandal. We live in a culture that worships power, that treats success as the ultimate validation, that produces endless books and podcasts and seminars about how to dominate, how to win, how to crush the competition. But what if the game is rigged, not against you, but by you? What if the strategies that help you climb are the same strategies that ensure you fall? What if the 49th law, the one Robert Greene never wrote, is this? The only lasting power is the power you don't need to protect. The only real security is being someone people want to support, not someone they're forced to support. The only victory that matters is one where you don't create enemies you have to keep watching. Diddy read a book about power. He memorized it. He lived it. He embodied it more completely than perhaps anyone in his generation. And in the end, the book may have taught him everything about how to gain power. And nothing about why it matters. Nothing about what to do with it beyond getting more. Nothing about who to become beyond someone who has it. The empire is crumbling now. The lawsuits pile up. The investigations continue. The reputation that took 30 years to build has been shattered in months. And somewhere, in homes across America, young, hungry people are reading the 48 Laws of Power for the first time, underlining passages, taking notes, dreaming of their own empires. I hope they read Diddy's story too, not just the rise, but the fall, not just the power, but the price. Because every law has a consequence. Every strategy creates a counter strategy. Every throne creates people who want to take it. And in the end, the most dangerous book isn't the one on your shelf. It's the one you memorize without questioning, the one you follow without doubting, the one that becomes so much a part of you that you forget where it ends and where you begin. Sean Combs didn't just read the 48 Laws of Power. He became it. And that, in the end, may have been exactly the problem. The book is still selling, still teaching people how to win, still promising power to those who master its secrets. But if this story teaches us anything, maybe the question isn't how to gain power. Maybe the question is, what kind of person do you become in the pursuit? And when you've reached the top, who's still there with you? Not because they fear you, not because they need you, but because they love you. That's a question that haunts empires, that haunts men who thought they were untouchable. And that will define the final chapters of one of the most fascinating, controversial, and cautionary tales in entertainment history. The 48 Laws of Power taught Sean Combs how to rule. It just never taught him how to last. And maybe that's not a flaw in the book. Maybe that's the point.